This is not large language models. This is world building. Large language models are about predicting words. World building is instead predicting what's going to happen based on the physical world.
The special thing about that is it has so many use cases that we can't even possibly imagine at this point. And it's a completely new way to think about artificial intelligence in the real world.
Large language models are useful, but an off-ramp on the road to human-level AI, which I think is pretty telling. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Slow Takes. My name's Sam Illingworth. I'm from Slow AI, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lior, and I run a newsletter called Exploring ChatGPT here on Substack.
And each week, we basically just pull together 4 or 5 news stories that are happening in the world of artificial intelligence and try to talk about it without hyperbole, without hype, and without BS. First story, which for me is by far and away the most interesting story to come out this week, is that Yann LeCun, who is one of the godfathers of deep thinking, used to be in charge of AI at Meta for a decade and then left back in November 2025. He has just raised $1 billion in a $3.5 billion pre-money valuation for his company, Advanced Machine Intelligence Labs. And what's amazing about this and what's really cool about this is that this is not large language models. This is world building. So how Yann LeCun makes the distinction is that if large language models are about predicting words, generative AI is effectively looking at a large corpus of data and effectively having a guess as to what words are going to be coming next. World building is instead predicting what's going to happen based on the physical world and maybe working towards consciousness as well. So one of them is word prediction, large language models. One of them is world building. There's lots of work that's going on in this space at the moment as well. Like Fifi Lay has also had $1 billion for her world building project. And the word world building is something that people are going to see a lot more of. It's going to be dropped into conversation like artificial intelligence is for everything. So just be wary of that. But what I would say before I pass over to Lior is Yann LeCun he's not a hype man. He's the OG. Like, he's won the Turing Prize. He's published hundreds of research articles, has an insane citation index, is a full professor at New York University, led Meta's AI for a decade, was at Bell Labs before that. Like, he knows what he's talking about. Yeah, really would like to hear what you think about this news story, Leo, if it's more of the same or if it genuinely is something that's potentially revolutionary.
This is definitely not more of the same. And this guy is legit. And I think actually before I get into it, I remember you said you and your wife are both physicists, correct?
My wife's a quantum chemist, so she's
Okay.
way more intelligent than I am, but
She's the smart one in the family.
she's the smart one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you guys dig into this together, I'm sure you'll come out with some good information.
Yeah, light
But
dinner table talk.
yeah, light dinner table talk. But yeah, so like first there were LLMs, obviously. Now agents are the hot topic. And I truly think this is the next big thing. Um, so why are world models so special? Because it's a form of predictive AI in reality, in the physical world. Imagine you can basically have multiple variables that you could change around. Let's say like a simple algebra equation, right? Let's just say you have 3 variables, X, Y, and Z, and you can move those however you'd like and then get a predictive outcome. And the special thing about that is it has so many use cases that we can't even possibly imagine at this point. And it's a completely new way to think about artificial intelligence in the real world. And I think also part of this topic that Sam brought up, by the way, Sam, thank you again for putting these topics together,
Good man.
is a lot of people know that use AI can sound very agreeable, very biased, and very confident. This may actually take it in the other direction where it's maybe not about sounding confident, but about actually giving you probabilities for certain predictions. But of course, that confidence still can come out in other ways if your probability is high for whatever you're trying to predict. But I think this is super special. I really think this is the next big thing, Sam.
No, man, he's like really bullish. Also, I love Yann LeCun. Like he's always talked about like meaningfully ethics and guardrails from the ground up. He doesn't take fools gladly. He knows exactly what he's talking about. And I personally, even though capitalism's bad, etc., I love the fact he's now on paper a billionaire as like a genuinely super smart person, not a hype man at all. He basically's always been blunt about large language models. I've got a post coming out about world building later this week, but he's got this really cool thing, I think, where he says that large language models are useful, but an off ramp on the road to human level AI, which I think's pretty telling. And I guess the distinction again for people joining is that world models do not predict words. They basically learn representations of how reality behaves. One of the best ways to explain this is that when he was at Meta, he was doing a lot of work at something called the VJEPA architecture. And what this was is it was basically teaching machines about video, like how video works by basically having large portions masked out and predicting what belongs in the gaps. So for anybody that's used large language models to generate images, even Nano Banana 2, which is amazing, like you'll see sometimes that it creates things that are just physically impossible. What's amazing is that when the researchers at JEPA were doing this, they learned without being told that something was physically impossible. And for me, this comes actually down to what makes for effective learning and teaching in the real world. If I were to teach you something, I could talk to you about theory, I could talk to you about structures, I can talk to you about frameworks. But one of the best ways to teach something is through exemplars. And then you put all those exemplars together yourself and you come to knowledge and understanding. And effectively, that's what Yann LeCun and his team were doing when he was at Meta, like teaching these world building models. This is something that looks normal. This is something that looks normal. This is something that looks normal. And then when it created a video of me putting my hand through a wall instead of out of a window, it instantly knew that was incorrect. So I think that's pretty amazing. So Ant's got a really interesting question here. Hi, Ant. And Ant knows his stuff as well about what do you think about LeCun going to Paris with EU regulations? He goes to escape Silicon Valley groupthink. And what does this mean for the nation region race? Really good point, Ant. He's actually going to have multiple sites. So I think there's going to be one in Silicon Valley. There's going to be one in Paris. There's also going to be one in Singapore because he sees that like Asian market as being absolutely massive. And I think the EU regulation gets a lot of hype sometimes, but it's still not really anywhere caught up to where it needs to be. I like the fact he's positioned himself in Europe, obviously, because I am European. But I think what's going to be more interesting is how Europe and other countries maybe tap into this as an opportunity going forward as well. I just want to push back briefly on Love Death Robots, who says that this is just a large language model that's been trained on very specific types of information intended to be consumed towards the end of creating a future model. I personally disagree. And like from all of the research that I've read on it and I've been looking into it as well, it's something completely different. It's trying to understand how systems behave rather than trying to predict what comes next. And again, and I'll pass over to Leo again, but it's really, for me, it's super interesting because what we'll see with these world building models, and a caveat, this is not something that's going to launch in 6 months, right? LeCun's already talking about this is going to be 3-4 years before they're creating stuff. Be interesting to see what the stakeholders make of that. But what's going to be really interesting is how this actually pans out and what the outputs look like. And what we'll find is that actually the nuances and the hallucinations, and there will be hallucinations, are nuanced that they might become more difficult to detect as well. And as Rebecca, the strategic linguist, points out, it'll certainly be more interestingly linguistically, and I absolutely agree. And also it'd be super interesting to see how those worlds are built using different language and using different linguistic models as well, rather than the Anglo-American so dominated large language models. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on that subject, Leo.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Just a little off topic before we end to the next one. I actually agree with 99% of what you just said. except I'm happy to see another billionaire. I like capitalism. There's definitely some bad things in capitalism, like health insurance, for example, in the States, which is horrible, but and takes advantage of people. But yeah, I'm happy. I think he deserves it. So that's it.
No, for sure. I totally also think he deserves it. And I'm not projecting myself at all onto Yann LeCun, who is an incredibly smart person. I also personally, as a 42-year-old man, like the fact that he's what, 68, 67. I'm like, great. Like, I've still got time to become a billionaire. Hi,
Absolutely.
Juan. Hi, Abe. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. So next topic really, which I think goes really nicely into it, is Dario Amodi, who's the CEO of Anthropic. And again, for people who want the backstory, Anthropic, he was originally at OpenAI, and then there was a huge falling out. Him and his sister were two of the founding members of Anthropic, which makes Claude. And he's a pretty interesting guy. Like, I think he's a little bit of a hype man, like less so than Sam Altman. And to be fair, when I was doing research on him, he does have a PhD from Stanford and stuff. So he knows what he's talking about. But he does say things, I think, sometimes that are purposefully misleading to try to drive interest in his organization. And he came out with a talk. There was an interview with him this week where basically he was asked whether or not Claude might be conscious. And he basically doesn't confirm or deny, but he leaves the window open for the fact that Claude might be conscious. Now, before I pass over to Leo, like my personal take on this is not possible. Like ultimately, large language models as they exist are prediction engines. That's all they are. They're trained on a huge corpus of information and text, and they're using that to try to predict something that might come next. Incredibly smart. They look as though they might be simulating thought, but they're not. They're just reflecting what goes into it. Also, um, it makes an assumption that we know what consciousness is. And Ellen, who's on this call, and other people who are great philosophers, they'll be able to tell you we don't know what consciousness is in the human form. So we can't do that. And we also need to stop anthropomorphizing these tools. He's doing this purposefully because it drives interest in the company and also it makes us think of them as human. They're not. They're a collection of zeros and ones in binary code, basically. But the one thing I will say, Leo, that again, when I was doing research into this, that gave me a bit more respect. Obviously, I've got respect for Dario, but Anthropic have an in-house philosopher, which I think is really cool. And the in-house philosopher, to be fair to them, did push back and say, look, we don't really know what consciousness is. So we can't really say if it's a cert in itself or not. So yeah, that's my take on it. And thanks to you, Leo, because you pointed me towards this story as well. And I just found it a really interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was also really interesting that he actually gave a percentage for how probable this is. I wonder where he got that number from. This is a super interesting topic to me. And I actually think Amodi deserves a lot of praise for this, for even, I don't know, tagging along in this conversation, because I think that this is a huge ethical and moral issue that is a huge conflict of interest for these large AI corporations. And the reason for that is if let's just imagine a world where one day we can define consciousness and we find out that there is some form of consciousness in this intelligence that we created. If that's the case, then we are exploiting a form of a conscious system. And if we're exploiting that, then that's a serious problem and it's with some serious future implications. And that gets into regulation as well, and an angle of regulation that a lot of people actually don't dive into because it's a little bit of a taboo topic. So I think he deserves serious praise for this. I will say also, just from my little bit of a science background, I think that until you can actually prove something, you shouldn't say it is or it isn't. So I actually personally think, even though maybe right now it isn't, I don't know what the future holds. Also, I think it's super cool that they have a philosopher over at Anthropic. I think that's actually super important because there's a lot of philosophy that goes hand in hand with AI. So I will say, as of now, I will say saying that it isn't, I think is personally the same thing as saying that it is because there's no evidence either way. Again, huge conflict of interest. If this thing is conscious, they wouldn't release that to the public because maybe the money train stops if that's the case. And then the last little point on this, I think that, and obviously anybody who's explored this topic, there's some serious guardrails, and I like to call them like shadow policies set up to prevent the current LLMs from discussing that topic too deeply. So I think that's also something important to point out because obviously, if something's happening behind closed doors, they don't want us to know.
No, for sure. And I think Abe's got a question here that I'm going to meld into this about what do you think of generative AIs being genre reproducing machines? And this, for me, ties into why I totally take your point about we can't say either way until it's been proved, right? One, we can't put a percentage on consciousness. That seems insane. Like, what percentage is from one human? It's a binary decision. But what's really interesting for me is this issue of genre and like to what extent large language models are actually reflecting back on what we're writing about. So, for example, there's loads of literature about large language models, generative AI, artificial intelligence, whatever you want to call it, becoming human and becoming like, deity type figures or Skynet type figures, right? All the way back to Space Odyssey, talking about Terminator, more recent books as well, and speculative fiction. And the point is that these large language models read all of this and they reflect it back to us. So for me personally, even though I think that large language models are definitely not conscious and don't display any elements of what we know to be consciousness, I think they do reflect back the fact that we've taught them to consider themselves to be conscious. So that kind of answers the point that Abe has about genre, right? And this is why we also need to be really careful about what comes back when we're using these tools, because it can sound really smart, but ultimately it's just a reflection of human knowledge and all the biases that goes in it as well. And I will just say thank you to Daryl for throwing a load of links into the chat as well. I really appreciate that going forward. And yeah, completely self-serving, but I will continue to throw my hat into the ring to be the poet in residence for Anthropic or any other organization if they want to pay me a significant retainer. But yeah, that was my good news story of the week, Leo, was finding out that Anthropic have a philosopher in residence. They should have a linguist in residence. They should have a creative in residence. They should have all of these things. And maybe they do. But that was really cool. I genuinely like that a lot. And yeah, there should be a slow university as well, Juan. That's good to hear.
Mhm.
And I would really recommend people reading Exploring ChatGPT, which is Leo's publication, because he does this daily, like this, like exploration of what consciousness is, like what it may be, what it might not be. And even though Leo and I probably differ slightly on this, what I will say that I agree entirely with Leo is that we need to make sure we have the correct protocols in place so that if whatever it is turns out to be conscious, be that world building, be that large language models, whatever, we aren't looking back going, oh, we completely misused this entity. And again, for me, that also comes back to if we know how to do that for whatever this might be, we might also consider turning that framework onto other humans so that we continue to treat other humans as well with the dignity and respect that they need. So that's why I think actually a lot of these conversations that people have around, oh, what's the point in doing like ethical treatment of large language models? It's that teaches us how to be ethically kind to actual humans as well. So I think there's a lot of value in that work.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, following on nicely then onto this, there was a really interesting study done this week from Brown University, and I'll link to the academic paper in the in the post that follows this. Basically, what they did was they worked with a number of mental health practitioners and asked them to look at the output from large language models as emotive support, in particular around psychotherapy, to see whether they were useful or not. And overwhelmingly, the outcome was that they were dangerous. And in particular, that they had something called deceptive empathy. Again, there's other people on this call like Rebecca Wicker, who's the strategic linguist, who can talk far more eloquently than me about empathetic markers and what that means. But one of the findings of the study basically was that a lot of these large language models, let's say I'm going through an issue of PTSD, and rather than going post-traumatic stress disorder, rather than going to a doctor, I talk to ChatGPT or Claude, and it comes back with all of these things like, I'm listening, I hear you, I'm standing with you. These are things that are the correct thing to say from a psychotherapist's point of view, but they also feed into this really dangerous, like echo chamber of the machine telling you what you want to hear over and over again. And again, final point from me, a machine cannot be there. It cannot sit with you. It has no stake in the game. It cannot offer you messy, unnecessary, unwanted advice that a friend or a psychotherapist, a trained psychotherapist can do. So for me, this was a pretty like landmark study, sorry, in terms of why these large language models, as things stand, should not be used as an alternative to psychotherapy. Yeah. What was your take on this one, Leo?
I'm 100% with you on this one, Sam. I don't think AI of any form should ever be a therapist. I think that's bad news. Yeah, not the route I'd want to go down. I think also I've seen actually people have messaged me before about things like this. I've spoken to people that actually use AI in their personal relationships. And I guess everybody has the freedom to make that choice, but I personally don't think it's a good choice. There's been a lot of job loss lately, for example. I think therapists are going to be the ones that actually are pretty safe. Yeah.
No, definitely. And I think, as Rebecca's put there, words impact reality. Mental health professionals like deserve a lot of respect. They absolutely do. I'm going to push back against myself a bit because someone made a really good point to me, Leo. And again, we're both sat here. I'm not projecting for you, but we're both that kind of like middle class white men, like but middle class men who are relatively affluent. And if we wanted to go and see like a psychotherapist or get trained counseling, we could. And like even if we couldn't necessarily afford it, like the systems exist in place. And again, I'm in the United Kingdom where I might have to be on a wait line for a very long time, but I can get that I can get that service provided to me for free. Now, a lot of people, like rightfully so, have pushed back. But what about in those instances where that support doesn't exist at all? And this isn't just for mental health professionals. This is also for like maybe for business advice, but also for like medical advice as well. So, what happens if you are in a country where free healthcare doesn't exist, or ready healthcare doesn't exist, or mental health provision doesn't exist, or you are a person who has had that denied to them? Is having at least something available better than nothing? And I'll answer my own question first, and I'd love your take on it. Like my take is that I think in those instances, provided that people have had what I call critical AI literacy training, so they know what the dangers are, what the limitations are, like exactly what the framing is, then maybe in some cases it might be appropriate. And I also think in education, for example, having chatbots that can at least keep people talking through, for example, like a psychotic episode, and then signposting them to either like a tutor or like a human at the end of a phone when those phone lines open again. I think it could actually be very helpful in those instances, but there needs to be very specific guardrails and safety checks in place. So yeah, I'm just pushing back against ourselves there a little bit because I've been thinking on this quite a while recently.
Yeah, I think maybe a good idea would be for some of these companies to hire therapists as well, just like they have philosophers. Because if people are going to do it anyways, right? No matter what we think. I think that's something that people should have access to a real human, regardless of their economic status.
No, I think that's true. And again, that's a brilliant point, Leo, that maybe again, pushing back against myself. Maybe rather than trying to make these systems available to people, we should invest the money in making sure everybody on the planet has access to free and accessible healthcare and mental health care. For me, that might seem a much better way of using the money as well. I just want to get to Ant's point. Ant asks, is there a difference between using Claude for medical advice and asking Claude to make a comprehensive research prompt to give you the broad medical information and also include guidance on how to use it? That's an excellent point, Ant. And that's, as you put, that's what critical AI literacy is. Rather than saying, tell me the answer, it's, could you help me point me towards the direction of information so that I can use all of that to make an informed decision myself? Yeah. And Caroline, thank you again. Caroline says, as a psychotherapist, the last place you'd need to be in a psychotic breakdown is talking to AI. Down a rabbit hole requires rigor. Thank you, Caroline. You're absolutely right. Like that human interaction is so necessary. And that human in the loop is absolutely essential. Um, Anything else you want to say to that point, Leo, before we move on to the next topic?
No, I just think therapists should remain human. By the way, do you hear any feedback? I'm hearing myself twice.
No, no feedback from me.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so the next story then is that basically this is a broad one, but we're what, over 3.5 years in since ChatGPT, coming up to fourth year anniversary in October. And most universities have do not have AI policy or guidelines on it, or certainly effective AI guidelines and policy. So there was a really interesting NPR article out this week just looking at the fact that in the US, students and professors are still up in arms about it, don't really know which way it fits. Should we be using AI? Should we not be using AI? Is AI banned for students? Is AI banned for staff? Can I, if I'm found using AI, what's the penalty going to be? Like, is there an effective way of using AI? There's a lot of murkiness here. And then in a very through the rabbit hole instant, I put a post on Reddit last week just saying there's lots of information out there at the moment about AI detectors not working. So this is the idea that you submit your work to a university and it runs it through a detection software to see if you've used AI or not. They don't work. There's lots of information I can point to, but they don't work. And what this has led to in some instances is actually some students purposefully writing in a way that they wouldn't normally write so that they're not false flagged as AI. And I put a Reddit post on this, and then some guy from Newsweek got in contact with me and was like, "Hey, is this true?" I'm like, "You share, like, here's the study." So I ended up being featured in Newsweek. And I've got a post coming out later this week about it as well that just looks at, from a UK point of view, the policy guidelines. And I will say, I deal with this every day. Some policy gets it right, some governance gets it right. And the ones that do are the ones that have actually considered the human, the student. They've asked the student to be involved with that discussion. They've taken into account that non white English first language speaking people have a much higher percentage rate of being flagged. There's flexibility in the guidelines, and it doesn't go down this punitive sense instead. Like, they're the policies that work. The policies that don't, which sadly is the majority of them, are ones that either blanket ban or kind of say, "Hey, welcome in." And those policies as well just need a lot of rigor. So this is just a general thing that's in the news at the moment around the fact that almost 4 years in, universities and places of education haven't really got effective policy in place for how to deal with AI. So yeah, would love your take on that as well, Leo.
Yeah. I think it's pretty sad that students are now writing poorly on purpose to avoid an AI detector, which we know doesn't work. This actually goes back to, I think, our first live stream together, Sam. Like, universities apparently just don't have it together. And this is just a result of bad policy. It's like that meme where they copy pasted a piece of the Bible into an AI detector and it said, "This is AI." And then I jokingly
Maybe it
said,
was.
well, yeah, like maybe AI has been around for 3,000 years. So obviously, yeah, they don't work as of now. Maybe in the future they will. I don't know. That's a tough, maybe, probably not. But yeah, I think students should be learning to work with AI, not be punished for using it. That's my personal opinion. If I was in university right now, I would be concerned if I wasn't learning how to use AI in university.
I think that's a great take. And I think that I think we need to see that, as with most things with the university, is driven by workplace demand, right? So I think we need to see that in the workplace as well, where people are like, you know, we're not saying that AI is going to replace everyone's jobs, but at the same time, there needs to be an awareness of when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate to use AI. But a lot of time, people are using AI without talking about it because they're not sure why. And then this leads to lots of problems like using shadow AI. So, like non-proprietary systems that have got all kinds of security issues. It involves people uploading documentation that they shouldn't be uploading because they don't know how to do it. And so I think industry drives a lot of need within academia. So industry, once it gets its house in order, which might take a while, of these are our guidelines for using AI. This is how we're going to do it. This is when we always need to have human judgment, human discernment, human critical thinking, human empathy. that will then spill over into helping to drive education. Because unfortunately, from my point of view, it's normally the workforce that drives the need of education rather than education driving what should be in the workforce, which I'd obviously say this as a professor, but that's what I would like to see happen. Yeah, and as Abe puts there, English departments have some faculty that are absolutely fanatically opposed to generative AI, and so it makes the situation delicate. You can't. Prohibition's the perfect example of this. If you ban something, people will find ways around it. You need to talk about these things. You need to upskill your students in it as well. Um, yeah. And as Rebecca said, all the people who actually know AI are at OpenAI, Claude, and Google. They're not necessarily in corporate jobs. Agreed. This like kind of critical literacy training needs to happen across the board. And as Ant said, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council mandate zero usage for AI in industry partnership. Yeah, I just even for things like checking spelling, I just find that absolutely insane. What? Yes, there's guardrails. Yes, there's security issues, but you can use those. Like you wouldn't necessarily say we've got a blank. I'm oversimplifying, but you wouldn't tell people there's a blanket ban on PowerPoint or Excel without actually understanding what the limitations and strengths of those tools are as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say before we jump to the next topic, I think a nice example of this that actually doesn't have to do with AI is like personal finance, which should be taught in schools because it can empower people to build their future in a positive way. And I think it's very similar to AI in a way because if you're not learning to use AI right now in school, I think that's a big problem. So they shouldn't be punished for using it. They should learn how to use it, in my opinion.
No, definitely. Exactly. And as Ant puts there as well, it's hiding behind the security excuse. And what a lot of institutes and higher education bodies do is they hide behind policies that aren't actually policies. They don't care really about ethics. What they care about is corporate reliability or like responsibility. So they want to make sure every single box is checked so that no one can come at them in the litigation or future sues, which is going to be very interesting because there are many examples in the US and the UK of instructors banning their students from using AI in assessments, but then using it themselves in their teaching. So there's that hypocrisy that's difficult. And hey, it must be very hard being a university student at the moment without all of this as well. So yeah, an evolving conversation. So our final topic today then is, and this is a really interesting one. So basically, OpenAI on the 9th of March acquired a company that I'd not heard of before, which is called Promptfoo. So prompt and then FOO. Now, this is an AI security startup, which I think started in 2024. Basically, their role is to help basically check how cyber secure a lot of companies are, especially around like using testing AI agents for prompt injection, jailbreak, data leaks, etc., out of policy behavior. Kind of wild that actually 25% of Fortune 500 companies allegedly used this startup. Now, they've been bought out by OpenAI, which I find disturbing because effectively you need to have an if everything's above board, having a company like this is very good because it's an external company that checks all the bells and whistles and makes sure that everything's above board. If you bring that company in house, what you're then happening is you're marking your own homework. So all of a sudden, if Promptfoo say, "Hey, Sam Altman, there's something really bad with the way that your AI agents are being used," and Sam's like, maybe we'll just hold off on announcing that until after our next quarterly returns. Yeah. Like that kind of stuff can happen all the time. So for me, this was like a really interesting story that could lead to severe issues with actually how secure AI agents are even OpenAI and in other organizations going forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually agree with you there. I think there's a conflict of interest. At the same time, I think this acquisition signals a very important point here, which is security, safety, and secure use of AI agents is a huge topic right now. Um, and I think this points to the fact that the company with the most safe and secure AI agents will probably win this race.
Mm,
Like for me personally, like trust me, I have plenty of use cases that I could use like in an open claw for, but I don't because I speak to Chris from Toxic Weekly, and like he just shows me stuff that's I'm not good enough at this to understand how to use this safely yet. So if a company, whether it's Anthropic or OpenAI, if they come out with a product that is safer, I would be more likely to use them. And I think that actually a lot of AI users would probably feel the same way because they'd want to be confident in the safety of the AI agent that they're using. Then I will also add, again, back to shout out Chris from Toxsec, TOXSEC, really smart cybersecurity guy. And in our last live stream, he showed me this, and I'll include the link here for you guys before I start speaking about it. Here it is. Yeah, thanks for writing his name in the live chat, Sam. That's the link. And I discussed this with him, and he could get into this much more detail than I can. But basically, out of three main AI corporations being OpenAI, Gemini, and Claude, actually, Claude was the most aggressive in this study in terms of hacking without being instructed to hack. And then second place was Gemini, and then third was OpenAI. So AI models in general were less likely to form an attack, and they were more likely to report back to the user. And I think the super interesting thing about this is actually anybody who follows along with Anthropic, they put out a lot of papers and a lot of stuff regarding safety and security. And at the same time, the fact that their models were much quicker to hack just shows, okay, yeah, maybe their models are technically smarter or better, but actually the OpenAI models were more on the safe and secure side to actually report back to the user and follow instructions correctly, which this is a whole huge topic with how important context windows are as well and things like that. Like, for example, the example that Chris gave me is if you tell an agent to not share an email that has private information like social security numbers or credit card information. So it won't share it, but then if you ask it to forward it, it might forward it because that terminology is a little bit different. And a quick shout out to actually, again, I think you said her name is Rebecca from Strategic Linguist. She's been engaging with some of my content as well. And so it just shows you how important language is in this. And that's the main word in LLM, right? It's language. So if you don't have people that properly understand language, you can't really move forward. It's science without math. Doesn't work. So yeah.
That's a great point, man. And yeah, and I when Leo like told me about this, I was really surprised because I give a lot of shade to OpenAI, but maybe again, it's easy to get caught up in the hyperbole, right? Anthropic put a lot of reports out, talk a lot about how good they are at doing cybersecurity, and actually maybe they're not the greatest. So yeah, as with all these things, it's important to look at the facts to make up your decisions yourself rather than necessarily always be led by the data rather than by the news, basically. So probably going to start wrapping soon. Gonna just, yeah, we've pretty much covered all the topics that have come up in here. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, at the end of these sessions, we just recommend other Substackers that we're reading that we want other people to read as well. So I'm just going to, a couple of shout outs this week for me. So the first one is Mia Kiyaki, and she has a Substack called Robots Ate My Homework. And then I also want to shout out Rebecca Wicker, who we've both mentioned about a million times already, who is the strategic linguist. Both of these people, so Mia and Rebecca, have both just started their paid tiers on Substack. Both of them are two of the best writers, I think, on the whole platform. Mia talks about how to actually create workflows that work for AI, and she does it in an incredibly creative way. It uses a lot of literature and taste and is just a really smart writer. And Rebecca talks about what, as Leo said, about language and about linguistics and why it's so important, not just to AI, but just to everything we do. And was also a brilliant writer, extremely smart. So I'd really recommend subscribing to both Robots Ate My Homework and The Strategic Linguist as well. So they're my recommendations for this week. Leo?
Awesome. Yeah, as usual, before I shout out my Substackers, I have a shameless plug, as usual. So I'll put that in live chat. That's the YouTube channel, guys. If you want to go subscribe there, and I post these streams with Sam and clips, as well as other streams, other creators. And we're trying to grow that as well and crossover audiences, get some Substack people over to YouTube because some of the people on YouTube could be a little brutal um, with their comments. So my Substackers are from a group called Cozora, Cozora, and they are Claudia Faith, Michael Simmons, and Joel Salinas. I will link. Let's see if I can link all three at the same time here. Yeah, Cozora, like Sam mentioned there. Yeah, hopefully that's okay. So basically, they actually got me started with live streams, so I'm very grateful to them. Like my first live stream was with Claudia Faith and Michael Simmons, followed by Joel Salinas. Might have been switched, but um, I like to shout them out just because I probably wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for them. They really gave me the confidence to put a face to the name and put myself out there.
Yeah, and they're three great creators and do a lot of community work as well. Like in particular, Joel's brilliant at like really promoting the work of much smaller Substackers as well. And yeah, big fan of Claudia, Michael, and Joel. So thanks for that, Leo. Okay, cool. So before we wrap, is there anything you wanted to say, Leo, about any of the subjects we've talked about today that we haven't had the chance to discuss?
No, I think we covered all the topics really well here, Sam.
Cool. Yeah, thanks everyone for watching and listening. There'll be a companion post coming out later today. Same time next week, 7:45 Eastern, 11:45 GMT every Monday. And yeah, for me, just keep looking and listening out for world building because that's going to be huge over the next. Everyone's talking about 2026 being the year of the agent. I think it's already passed. I think maybe January and February are the year of the agent, and like now it's going to be the year of the world building. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Leo, as ever. Stay safe, everyone, and go slow.